Hello, thank you for being in a new video. This time I have with me the HUAWEI Nova 12i. Let's do a full review to get to know it. Let's get started. This is a lower mid-range device, so it's going to be simple in a number of ways. It has a few points that might stand out to you right now, such as its design, which you could say looks like a more advanced device, even though it's really a basic device. But if you like your device to look very sophisticated, you could find it here. We're also going to find MUI 14 as another of its attractions, because it already allows us much easier installation of many Google applications. So that's another one of its advantages. And finally, the storage, which in its top version reaches 256 gigabytes, although the base edition has 128. So let me share with you its prices, as the base model costs $4,999. That is approximately $285, although remember that the prices here are not the same as over there. In Mexico, taxes are included. And the 256 gigabyte edition goes up to 5,499 pesos, which is approximately $315. So, having known its price, remember that Huawei offers a very widespread distribution, and join me to know its design. In this regard, there are not too many surprises. Fortunately, it features a very reduced bezel design at the top, which may turn out to be its main attraction, although the bottom bezel is much thicker, confirming us that this is a simple device. Also, it's not going to include any special level of protection with the screen, so we don't find Gorilla Glass, Kunlun Glass, or anything like that, although it does come with a factory-glued mica to protect it a bit more. So, in aesthetics it is fine, although in resistance it may fall a little short. On the right side is the fingerprint reader, which is also the power button, in addition to the volume buttons located in a completely plastic frame. At the top we will find a microphone, and the left side is completely clean, and taking advantage of this profile view, I tell you that it has a thickness of 8.4 millimeters, fulfilling what it should. At the bottom, we will find the tray where we can place 2 nano SIM cards, although this may vary depending on your dealer. In addition, down here we will also find a microphone, the USB-C port, and the speaker. And as I anticipated, the back cover looks with an extremely attractive design, possibly one of its strongest points. In this case, I have the black edition, but it is also available in green. But note that in this color combination, the camera ring is in gold color. So definitely, it looks like a more sophisticated device than it actually is. So from my point of view, the design may be among its most attractive points in terms of aesthetics, although in terms of resistance not so much, since it doesn't offer any level of resistance against water. But it has a weight of 199 grams, so in that too it is in what one might expect from a device of this price point. The screen will also be simple. In this case, it has a size of 6.7 inches with a good resolution for this price range, which is Full HD+. We're talking specifically about 2388 by 1080 pixels, which gives us as a result a good density of 391 pixels per inch. So we have a detailed and sharp image. But in this case, we are offered an LCD screen. Although fortunately, within the LCD screens that you find on the market, this is possibly one of the ones that stands up in the best way, since the viewing angles are not as bad as we could find in other simpler screens. So the panel is fine, not only when you see it from the front but also from the side. However, it will not be able to offer us colors as intense nor contrast as high as we could find in an OLED screen. The manufacturer does not provide information regarding the maximum brightness level that reaches this screen, but I must tell you that you can use it in a good way outdoors, although in such scenarios you will definitely need to use it completely from the front to take advantage of the maximum brightness of the screen, because when you turn the device loses a considerable amount of brightness. And with respect to the minimum brightness, note that it is low enough to comfortably use the device. It also integrates dark mode, visual rest mode, also an ebook mode with grayscale, and of course it has 2 screen calibration modes, normal and vivid mode. Interestingly, with the vivid mode, the screen becomes a bit cooler, so it will be up to you as a user which mode you want to use. The screen resolution will be dynamically adaptable, as will the refresh rate, which goes up to 90 Hz, but interestingly, it is a screen that is not only capable of going down to 60 but up to 30 Hz. So when you're watching some static content, the display is going to be much more power efficient. So it's a good screen, although I think you'll find a more advanced screen on several competitors. There's only one speaker on the bottom, so it's got mono sound and it's really simple. The mid frequencies are the ones that stand out the most, so the sound is not perceived with too much quality. It has practically zero presence of bass frequencies, so this definitely could and should be improved. Let's listen to a small test, although remember that it is not the same to listen to it live. So, the speakers are not very advanced, and unfortunately through software we cannot customize the sound experience of those speakers. However, if we connect headphones via the USB-C port, we can access some software modifications where we can also activate a 10-band equalizer including a bass amplifier. So those are considerably good settings for the sound, but exclusively when you use headphones. And as you already noticed, it has no headphone jack, and I think this could also be another of its weakest points, due to the fact that in the price range it is not something usual. Surely most users are going to miss the headphone jack. In this case, you have to use wireless headphones, and it supports basic codecs like SBC and AAC. Although if you use Huawei wireless headphones, you could take advantage of this LC3LL codec to have a little more resolution, but it is a codec that only Huawei uses. So if you have headphones from other brands with advanced codecs, you will not be able to take advantage of them with this cell phone for a higher quality wireless sound. The device has two microphones, one on the bottom and one on the top. Let's listen to a test.
Esta es una prueba de audio grabada utilizando los micrófonos integrados del HUAWEI Nova 12i.
Definitely that also the microphones are going to give us simple quality. Below you will see a video recorded with this device setting the sound system in my living room at maximum volume to see how it behaves in these environments. Definitely that this device gets to significantly distort your audio in these noisy environments, so it would not be recommended at all if you really like to record concerts. The front camera is 8 megapixels and offers us an aperture of 2.0 with fixed focus. Remember that Huawei offers a gesture to double press the volume down button in order to quickly access the camera. Although the aperture is not characterized by being so fast, but the gesture can be used on those occasions that you need to open the camera quickly. However, it is a gesture that will not work if you have the screen on. Huawei, as always, gives priority to portrait mode when you rotate the front camera, and in this case it will offer us a picture that is not too agile. Fortunately, it does have the gesture for easy capture through the palm of your hand, and in fact you can also enable voice control or smile capture. You can also enable the floating shutter so that you can place it wherever you want and take the picture more comfortably. Within the portrait mode, you can enable or disable the bokeh effect and also modify the intensity of the beauty filter with 3 different parameters. This front camera will give us a simple performance. Fortunately, it seems to have a sufficient level of detail, although if you get closer, you'll see that it's not that detailed a picture, but overall, I think it does look with a good sharpness. It has fixed focus, so if you stretch your arm too far, maybe you could lose a little bit of detail, but it still comes out a good quality photograph. You could probably go out with a group of 2 other friends. But if you're too close to the camera, it will come out of focus, which is natural because it's fixed focus, and in this price range it's the norm. Indoors, the result is very similar because if you don't zoom in too much, you'll notice a good level of detail, but if you get close, you'll notice that it's not as detailed a picture, although it's to be expected at this price. Honestly, it doesn't disappoint. We notice that the colors are not as accurate, but at the price it will be difficult to find better quality selfies. However, in the evenings it looks an even paler picture, so it won't offer us too much quality. It will use the screen to illuminate your face a little better, and with that you can have a photo with a better result. But in the darker areas we'll have a little more noise than desired. Obviously, in extreme backlit situations at night, the result is quite bad, even though in this case it does try to balance highlights and shadows well. It tries to illuminate your face as well and tries to reduce noise in the darker areas, but the final result is still not good enough. If you use the night mode, notice that it will have a bit more intense effect on the dynamic range, although the darker areas gain much more noise as well. And night portraits are not a good idea because the noise generated in the foreground clashes so much with the cleanliness of the background, giving an unnatural result altogether. And in the daytime, portraits don't go up too much either. Note that it is not able to keep the edges of the face in focus. In fact, in this case, it confused the cap area. So the result is really very bad, plus it's not able to keep the foreground objects in focus. So I don't like the result of portraits with this camera. And finally, in backlit scenarios, notice that before taking the picture, we have a completely burnt preview. But after taking the picture, the result is considerably good. In this sense, yes, we could say that it has an excellent performance, balancing very well lights and shadows, so don't be disappointed if before taking the picture it looks very bad, because afterwards it does a processing and the result is very good. On the back, even though it looks like it has a very advanced photographic system, it actually only has 2 cameras, and of these 2, only one is going to work for you. So this is the 26mm camera with a 108 megapixel sensor. It has f1.9 aperture and autofocus. It's got good specs, but we'll see in a moment if it gets to take advantage of this sensor. The second camera is simply for depth sensing to support portrait photography. So it offers us 2 megapixels with f2.4 aperture. Honestly, I do not consider it very useful. Then it's just decoration, and finally the flash. Like any cell phone, the preview has some level of delay when you are viewing, and it takes about half a second to capture. So you can't capture the exact moment even if you wanted to. And even though it has a burst of up to 100 pictures, it actually takes almost 2 seconds to start that burst. So it ends up being a bit useless. In this case, the device also has artificial intelligence that comes disabled by default, so we tested it with this setting turned off. And you can also enable some different color filters that you can use when taking your pictures. If you tap on the screen, you can adjust the exposure or also the focus. And remember that it also includes a more professional mode where we can move different parameters like the metering type, the ISO which can go up to 6400, the shutter speed which goes up to 8 seconds, the compensation, the focus and the white balance. But it cannot take pictures in RAW. The device doesn't allow QR code scanning directly from the main camera interface. So you need to open AI Lens, which is a separate app, although the shortcut is from the camera app. Through this app, you will be able to do this simple action. This device also includes a document scanner mode that you need to access manually in case you want to do this action. The detection does not seem to be so advanced, so you can get to confuse some corners. And it's a very simple scan that will only look like a cropped photo, unlike other devices that feature color optimizers. It also integrates multi-camera mode with which you can connect to other Huawei devices that have your same account to have multiple angles when recording a video. The device has a 108 megapixel mode with which you can get a picture of that resolution, but the level of detail does not correspond to those 108 megapixels. So it doesn't take advantage of all the information on the sensor. Look at how it has a low level of detail and just exaggerated sharpness, so it's not going to give you good photos in this high resolution mode. Fortunately, moving pictures, if you have very good lighting, will come out fine. Moving objects are still going to come out with good quality, although in this case it looks like the nose came out a little weird. Outdoor photography is going to be of acceptable quality. At this price you do not get to have very remarkable cameras, but it seems to me that the photography will definitely be simple. We cannot demand too much, but in this case, however, it falls a little short. Regarding the zoom range, this device will allow us to get up to 10x fully digital zoom. Unfortunately, again, it falls short of taking advantage of the 108 megapixel sensor, which should be more optimized. Also, this device does not incorporate an ultra-wide camera, so you might miss it for wider captures, but it does integrate a panorama mode with which you can get to have this kind of results, which I think are positive. Fortunately, it's a panoramic shot with good resolution, although the dynamic range is not that high, but I find the result pleasing. So the ultra-wide camera, you might not miss it too much using the panorama mode. Indoors, the photography is straightforward and proves once again that this is a device that will not have very good photographic capabilities to compete, especially with the color management, which in this case looks quite inaccurate. The level of detail is high enough, but it's definitely not a photograph we can boast too much about. And in tricky backlit conditions, the preview doesn't look very optimized. In this case, the shadow area looks very dark. And note that when processing the photograph, it can perform a bit inconsistently. In this case, it's clear that we were in front of a fairly intense backlight, but notice that in the result, only the face comes out lit in the dark areas and the rest of the photograph doesn't. So it gives a rather artificial and strange result. At night, curiously, is where I found this camera behaves best. And this is curious because at night, it's generally a more complicated environment. But notice how it balanced the brighter areas perfectly well, kept a good control on noise, and also maintained good color saturation. Interestingly, if you use night mode, the result gets worse. Although in darker areas, the camera in auto mode can get a little darker than desired. And with night mode, it increases the light, but it also changes the level of detail, which now looks less and also looks overexposed in some scenes. So the night mode, I think, should be refined. I think with auto mode, you have good results. As for macro photography, even though it doesn't have a camera that specializes in this, remember that most macro cameras in this price range are going to be a disaster. So I like that it doesn't integrate a macro camera, because with the main camera you get very good results. If you apply a little bit of digital zoom, you're going to get a result like this, maintaining good color saturation, good level of detail. So macro photography I like on this device. And finally, portrait photography is going to be regular, especially because you have to consider that this device supposedly integrates a camera specialized in detecting depth. But note that in the result we will notice that there are objects and foreground areas that do not seem to be very well focused. So I think the portrait photography could be improved, especially considering that it has a camera specialized in detecting depth. The result overall is going to be positive, but I think considering the hardware it has, it should be better. For video recording, this device will be simple. It supports full HD recording at 30 frames per second on both the front and rear cameras. When you start your video recording, note that it has some shortcuts to move the zoom easily, or you can also slide to reveal this ring. You can also take pictures, even pause and resume content. And something extraordinary is that you can rotate to the front camera without the need to stop your video recording. And this is something that few devices support. Even the Huawei Pura 70 does not have this option, therefore it is one of the features that we could get to highlight. Also, you can turn on the flashlight without the need to stop your video recording, so at least in this sense it does give us a versatile experience. The video is also going to give us a simple quality. Note that it is in full HD. Fortunately, the colors look good and it doesn't seem to have problems managing this color or lighting, at least in environments that aren't complicated, but you immediately notice that it does not have stabilization even at this point where we are not yet evaluating that parameter. Indoors, the result is obviously going to be simpler because more noise is present. Even the screen comes to light up to illuminate you despite not being in so much darkness, but definitely the colors have little accuracy and low level of detail. So it is not so recommended to shoot in these conditions. In backlight, the result will definitely be quite disastrous. Look at the aggressive jumps in the exposure. There are moments where this video looks very shaky and confirms that the color is not very accurate in these environments. Notice how the red shirt turns a little pink at times. At night it seems to have good noise management, but the exposure jumps are again going to be noticeable, as well as some unnecessary focus adjustments. So the focus can struggle a bit too much when you're in these dark environments, and the result is going to look really bad. The device doesn't integrate digital stabilization, let alone optical, and that's very noticeable when you're walking around. Much more so when you're running, and even as you already noticed, without the need to be walking, it's noticeable that it doesn't have stabilization. The fast camera has an automatic speed adjustment. It goes at a low bit rate, so you don't see the movements very well defined. So it's a simple fast camera. And on the other hand, the slow motion is in HD at 120 frames per second. So again, it's simple. It even has a little bit of noise present there. It's definitely not a device that's going to stand out for its video recording quality. And finally, look at how it performs with respect to focusing. For starters, you should see the jumps in exposure that I was telling you about a moment ago when it detects or fails to detect the face. And with respect to the focus, since it has a lens that is not that advanced, it seems that you don't get to notice the moment of refocusing too much. You need to be very close if you want it to be noticeable. But as you saw, when it has good light, it can refocus well, but when it has difficult lighting, it's going to struggle a lot. And as for handling the zoom in video recording, note that the result is bad, mainly because it doesn't have a stabilizer, as I had already told you. So when you zoom in, this is much more noticeable. The level of detail fortunately seems to be correct for the price range, but it does need stabilization. The front camera records in Full HD without stabilization, which is a weak point. Also, it's going to perform poorly in backlight and the colors can get to look inaccurate. So again, it is a video quality too simple. Even the color can get a little bit too altered. So it's definitely a very simple and basic result. It will be advisable to record in good lighting environments and without too much movement to have a good quality. Remember that it has fixed focus. Indoors, interestingly, the recording seems to be of slightly better quality in terms of color handling and level of detail, but it seems to be going at a low frames per second rate. It seems to have some complications, although the video says it's at 30 frames per second, but it looks a bit odd. Lastly, in low light conditions, it's definitely going to suffer a lot more by having more noise present. In this case, you will need to use the screen as a flash simulation to light up better, although this will just make the face appear a little sharper, but everything else will have a lot of noise. On the front camera, we will also find the fast camera mode, but just like on the back, it goes at a very low bit rate, so you see a low level of detail. In fact, the video is in HD, so it is quite simple and with automatic speed settings. It does not integrate front slow motion, but it does integrate a dual camera mode, which is surprising because at this price very few devices allow it, so possibly this is one of its strengths, although none of the cameras is stabilized. So the result does not look very high quality, but it is curious that it does allow you to zoom, it does have autofocus enabled, and in addition to the split screen mode, you have a picture-in-picture mode where you can move the floating frame to adjust it to the position you want, although it has a limit in the right area. You cannot resize it, but you still have the possibility of zooming, and the focus is also enabled. If you want to rotate the cameras, you have to stop the recording and start it again. So even though it doesn't offer us that much versatility, it is a mode that can be useful for many people because not all devices in this price range integrate it. This device comes with EMUI 14 from Huawei, so this allows you to install Google Apps much more easily. Note that YouTube works natively for me, Gmail works natively, so it has been greatly facilitated through this update the use of Google applications. In the description I leave you a video where I tell you how to install them, but that could be one of its main benefits, especially with respect to past generations of Huawei, where it was not possible. However, Huawei does not offer a clear update policy for this device, so we do not know if it will receive EMUI 15 or future versions. Let me tell you about the added features we found in this phone. Remember that on the main screen, some icons you can slide them up to discover more functions or shortcuts. Another novelty of this system is that it allows you to apply themes and in the case of the lock screen, customize it even with some interactive themes that would have some animations even in transition with an always-on display cover. So they can get to give you a very good experience, or you can also select some poster skins that again will have a nice transition in conjunction with the lock screen and the always-on skin. So notice how we could edit, in this case, the position of the picture for the cover art, and of course we can also select our own picture in case we want to place something special. In this case, I'm going to place this flower, and notice how immediately everything is customized in this way. And you can even select the color of the template that pulls the colors from your photograph. So the lock screen customization really is very nice. And notice how the transition in the system is very nice. Although in this case, being a device with a simple processor, in some cases the transitions can get to be affected. Although notice it's already working well and we have the always-on cover. Then we can wake up the device and make a friendly transition. And when we unlock the device, we're also going to be able to access the full screen mode on this background. So that's another highlight. And if you're very observant, you might have noticed that the always-on display feature is not usually available on devices that don't have OLED displays. But in this case, even having an LCD screen, Huawei has enabled this always-on display feature that you can obviously customize with different cover art. There are even some paid cover art for you to view those contents. Although note that in this case it does get to turn off, so it doesn't stay on all the time like an AMOLED screen. But at the very least, it does give you an interesting glimpse. Remember that Huawei incorporates its own voice assistant that I would only recommend using to control some parameters of your cell phone, but not to ask it for information. For that, it's still a very simple assistant. The one-handed use mode is also very comfortable as it reduces vertically and horizontally. And remember that Huawei offers some gestures, including 2 knuckle taps to take screenshots or 2 taps with 2 knuckles to record the screen. Although it is a low-resolution recording, but it can be useful in this price range. Also remember that there's the floating window app dock. And note that in this case, it allows us to only open one of these apps at a time, so we don't have as much versatility, although at least it does include this feature. And this window we can resize or minimize within this other sidebar. So it can be a useful tool, and in fact you can also transform your apps into floating window or split screen from the recent apps view. Another feature that I like is Clip by Petal, which is the editor included for free, since it will offer us a lot of tools and it's not going to add any watermarks, so it is a very good editor. Although this device is not very powerful for editing video, but the application is appreciated. With this device, you can also select multiple photos to compare them directly. And notice how you can enable or disable some of them. And when you move any photo to see the details, they're all going to move at the same time, so that in this way, it's easier for you to choose which photo you like the most and which ones you want to delete. So it offers us some interesting options at the software level, but obviously you might still run into some drawbacks on very specific things that have to do with Google, although most of those drawbacks have been eliminated. The fingerprint reader of this device will allow us up to 5 different registrations, so it has very good capabilities. The recognition is fast, although the device takes a little bit longer to wake up, but that is due to performance limitations. Additionally, it integrates facial recognition, although it is also simple in 2 dimensions, so it is not so recommended if your priority is security, but for convenience you can use it. And also for convenience is the Smart Unlock, although in this case it does not allow you to select a location, but only a device, so that as long as it is connected to it, it remains unlocked. Huawei has its own password manager, although passwords are not synchronized in the cloud, so you can save passwords to fill them in later, but only locally. Fortunately, it does include tools like App Lock and Lockbox to give you a more private and more secure experience, but it does not include a child mode. If you happen to lose your phone, you can find it through Huawei's own tool. And in the privacy panel, you can also see the permissions that have requested applications, in addition to removing metadata from your photos when sharing them so that they do not carry sensitive information. It will also give you suggestions showing you which apps are constantly accessing some permissions that are a bit more private, but it does not have its own VPN to offer secure browsing while you are connected to public Wi-Fi networks. What it does integrate is an anti-malware scan within the Optimizer app, which is in collaboration with the company More360, which is still not that prestigious, but at least it does include this level of security to combat malware. And finally, it also has the digital balance section, which in this case will allow you to manage both your device and that of your children to see the time you are consuming in certain applications. And you can protect all this with a special pin, as well as set usage limits at certain times. And finally, remember that emergency settings are also available, so you can set your contact information and you can press the power button 5 times to initiate an emergency call. The 5000 mAh battery in this case gives us a good battery life, slightly above the average cell phone. So I think it manages this power well. I ran the battery drainer and in the foreground it lasted up to 4 hours and 20 minutes, and running it in the background while watching YouTube videos in the foreground, it reached a little over 8 hours. Although in this case the drainer running in the background was constantly shutting down. That's something that has also changed with the arrival of this new version of Huawei's operating system. So now it is likely that some applications that are running in the background come to close, and with this you lose some notifications. So it is important that the applications that for you are essential and that you do not want to miss any notification, turn them off in this section so that you can keep a manual control and do not get too close. Then the battery has a good performance, and you also have a normal saving mode, although you do not have an ultra saving mode. And with regard to charging, we have a considerably fast charge, especially during the first few minutes. The charger included in the box is 40 watts, and in 15 minutes it recovered 26% in the test I did. In half an hour it got up to 47%, and then you know it starts to get a little bit slower. So the full charge, it finished it in 92 minutes. In this price range, I think that's a positive thing. Fortunately, this device allows you to see what the current state of the battery is with respect to its health. So if you are going to buy the device second-hand, it is important to check this information. In addition, it has smart charging to take care that the battery does not degrade so fast, especially if you leave it charging overnight so that it charges a little slower. And in case you need to always have it plugged into the current, you will be able to enable a custom charge limit that I recommend leaving it at 70% so that the battery does not degrade even if it is always plugged into the current. So it comes with good charging protections as well. This device does not yet have 5G connectivity, so the experience is a bit more limited in this regard. Also, you can't add an eSIM for those times when you're on the go, but fortunately you can regulate which apps will use your mobile data to connect to the internet and which apps will only be able to do so over Wi-Fi. So this is something I love. In this case, we'll find Wi-Fi 5, so it has a modest download speed, but it's okay. Especially Huawei always tends to make very good use of their antennas. Although in terms of Bluetooth, we will only count on version 5, so it does not offer us something so modern in terms of connectivity, so some headsets might present a little more instability with respect to more modern versions. Even though it does have NFC, it can't be much taken advantage of since you can't use Google Pay or Google Wallet. So you are completely dependent on other apps to make mobile payments, and where you could take advantage of NFC is when connecting with some accessories such as headphones or routers, and despite being a device focused on an economic segment, it does not offer FM radio. That is another important absence, and in this case it is able to make a wireless projection of your screen but not via cable. In addition, it is a projection only in mirror type, but it can be useful, and it does not have Android Auto installed, although you can get to install it independently. But of course, not coming completely from the factory, it could still come to present some inconsistencies, although at least it can already be installed. And in the sensors, we must highlight the absence of the gyroscope, which in some games or applications can become indispensable. In addition, the proximity sensor is virtual, so it could also generate some inconsistencies. So pay close attention in this regard. The ecosystem is always a very strong point in Huawei because it has a lot of devices and they all interact very well with each other. Devices will recognize each other quickly. Remember that if you have a Huawei watch, you could take pictures from the watch and also have synchronized alarms and timers. If you have a Huawei computer called a MateBook, you can bring your phone up to its own NFC tags to send photos or link very easily. You can browse all the files on your phone directly on the computer or completely control this phone, even drag and drop files. Well, that in general is a super advanced ecosystem experience that you can find with these devices in conjunction with all the others in the same family. Although you don't have a pre-installed app to try to control home devices, so hopefully that can be improved over time. You could go as far as installing Huawei AI Live, but there aren't that many devices compatible with it. Fortunately, if you follow my tutorial that I left you in the description, yes, you could get to install Google Home. And regarding cloud storage, you are not dependent on Google, as Huawei does offer you their own cloud where you can back up your photos or even Wi-Fi passwords, notes, and more. For free, they offer you 5 gigabytes, but you can extend this cloud storage if you want to back up all your information and forget about those problems that in case you lose your cell phone or something happens to it, you will lose all your photos because everything will be backed up automatically. There are plans of up to 2 terabytes at a price that I consider to be quite attractive. So, we could get to take advantage of this cloud storage, and it is one of the strengths of Huawei, where you can see that it is a very strong brand that does not depend 100% on others. Let's show you now the performance test. This device integrates the Snapdragon 680 processor, a device that we have already tested countless times since many devices have integrated this chip for many years. This shows us that it is a bit old processor, but evidently Huawei, for all the restrictions it has due to the US government, does not have the capacity to integrate last generation chips from other manufacturers. So we have to make do with this, which for a good number of users could still become a snappy experience, although due to the passage of time, in the middle of the year, it starts to feel sluggish, the experience on this processor. As you can see, it took approximately 4 seconds to open each of these applications, showing us that it is a simple device in terms of the performance it can achieve. Fortunately, it is backed up by 8 gigabytes of RAM, and this definitely shows, as even when you keep a lot of apps open, the device doesn't lose performance. However, its base performance is not too high, and so it will feel a bit of a sluggish experience when opening apps. But believe me, I have tested other devices in this price range that as you go on opening more apps, the performance drops little by little. So here the good news is that it maintains the same performance even when you have a lot of things open. So if you are one of those users who will open a lot of apps, I think the experience could be good. Notice that once the application is open, it's not going to take that long to navigate through it. So I think the performance can be good, I insist, for a good number of users. But you should definitely know that for this price, you are already going to start finding devices with more modern and more powerful processors. Now let's test the speed it is capable of reaching depending on the processor, RAM, and storage, since all that will be used at the time of exporting this video that has a total duration of 1 minute and are clips recorded in full HD with this same device. And that's it. It took about 35 seconds in this case. So even though it's a processor that's not very modern, I think it's still powerful enough to work with full HD videos. With regard to games, note that within the application settings we can access the apps wizard, where we can manage the games we have installed to also directly access the games area. From here you can add the shortcut to the main screen, and in this case we will be able to access some additional tools within our games, such as a special acceleration mode. You can also enable a do not disturb mode to avoid any kind of interruption, and you can also avoid unwanted operations by disabling gestures and other things. In addition, gestures with a knuckle are also disabled, and you can disable the automatic brightness to prevent it from flicking when you cover the light sensor when you are playing a game. So these are useful tools, although it's not the most advanced in the industry, but it's nice to have those options. And in fact, when you enter a game, notice that you can swipe from the top down to access these options in a more extended way. In fact, you can also activate the all options mode so that you can edit which selectors you want to be available, because there are also buttons available to take screenshots in image and video. You also have some buttons to access applications in floating form to have a kind of multitasking. So it has good tools. In this case, we started our tests in Call of Duty, where by default it gives us the medium quality at medium frame rate. Very high graphics quality is also available, but if you turn up the frame rate to as high as possible, the graphics quality will drop. So, keeping the very high graphic quality, note that there are also several effects available that you can enable, although it is recommended not to enable them, because although it is compatible with each of them, you will notice in a moment that the performance is going to be very bad in this mode. So, if you select the low graphics quality at a high rate, obviously the performance will be very smooth. But by selecting the very high graphics quality, you will notice that the device is not able to give you a very smooth experience. In fact, it's going to go at a pretty low frame rate on your average and with poor stability. So definitely, as has happened with other devices that use this processor, it is not recommended to play with a high graphics setting, even though it does have the compatibility. In PUBG, by default, you have the medium frame rate with a low quality, although it's called fluid here. In fact, you can only go up to balanced quality at high frame rate. And if you select the lowest quality, the ultra rate also appears available. But in this case, we're going to do the test with the balanced quality to try to put a little bit more complex test on it in terms of the graphics that it uses. And in this case, the game did perform well. Remember that this one is not as complex in terms of graphics as Call of Duty is. So both this and Free Fire, I think, would run well, as long as you select a quality that is appropriate for the price of this device. So we had no problems. It didn't even heat up. So if you run simple content or games in simple graphic qualities, this device will run smoothly enough. But remember that it's not going to give you very detailed textures. In the case of SpongeBob, by default, it defaults to medium resolution with high quality at 60 frames per second. But in this case, we lowered the quality to the medium level and kept the resolution at the same level. But note that it does not have the special image smoothing option available. And in this case, definitely that it will be a device that will have very little stability, i.e. constant up and down frames per second, although it doesn't get to be completely frozen, but definitely that at this price point you will find many other options for smoother gaming. So if your priority is gaming, it is clear that it is advisable to purchase another device, since in this case it can even be somewhat complex to recover the progress of your games if you have it saved in your Google account. But this will happen in some content and not in others. So I can't guarantee you a very good experience in all games, although obviously being a simple processor it won't get too hot either. So if you want a cool cell phone and you don't care about games, I think this can be a good option. Finally, we tested Asphalt 9, where we enabled 60 frames per second but kept the default graphics quality. And this is one of the most optimized games, so it just goes to show that this device with well-matched games and simple graphics could really give you a very good experience. In fact, it averaged 50 frames per second, but obviously if you try to play Genshin Impact at high graphic qualities, it will be impossible for this device. But in this case, still the experience was very good, so simple or well-adapted games will work fine. In conclusion, it is honestly a device that is very difficult for me to recommend to you, as it is not able to outperform its competitors on practically any point. That's why it becomes a poorly recommended purchase. But if you do get it, I don't think it will be completely disappointing in many ways either, although I think it's definitely one of Huawei's least recommended devices. For now, we've come to the end of this video. I hope you liked it. If you did, you know you can point it out. See you next time.